Hey, my friend, welcome back to the show. I'm Demetria, and if you are new here, I'm going to tell you what we do in this space. So we build podcasts that are genuinely aligned with your voice, your message, and your business, not podcasts that simply exist. Not podcasts that sit in your content plan as something you feel guilty about, but we want you to work on podcasts that actually work for you, that build real trust, real authority, and real relationships with the people that you're meant to serve. So I've been in this space for a long time, starting in 2005, and I've watched this medium evolve, watching what works and watching what breaks people down until they disappear from the mic altogether. And through my work with the Soul Podcasting Collective, I've had a front row seat as to what makes a podcast sustainable over the long haul and what makes it feel like a slow, invisible drain. So I hope that you enjoyed last week's podcast with Tanya Pesky. And we had a wonderful time chatting about how to hold space behind the mic and what it means to create a safe space for guest conversations. And so that was a very interesting conversation, one that I think is unique and something that isn't often talked about in podcasting. So I'd love for you to go back and take a listen to that one, which is episode number 118. All right, today I want to have a conversation with you that might feel just a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm going to say something that most people in this space don't say clearly enough. Not everyone should start a podcast this year in 2026. If you're listening to it next year or the year after, the same idea applies. So I've said it. It's one of those controversial things that we often don't like to say because we want to encourage everyone to share your voice, do your thing, show up on the microphone, be encouraged to do this work. But I also like to say that podcasting is powerful. It is one of those most intimate, trust-building mediums that exist right now. I think it can really grow your business. I think that it definitely can deepen your authority and position you as the go-to voice in your space. I believe that with my whole chest. But for some people, and I mean this with all the kindness in the world, podcasting can become a drain. It becomes a source of frustration and guilt and quiet burnout. And over time, it turns into something that takes more than it gives, without them even realizing how they got there. So today, I want to walk you through who podcasting is actually for, who it's not for, and what it really requires so that you can make a clear, grounded, honest decision before you press record on episode number 1 or before you decide whether or not to keep going on to episode 47. So before we get settled in, I always ask you to do something, which is grab your coffee or your tea or your sparkling water, whatever it is that you like to settle into, and then come back to this episode with intention and not just background noise. This isn't a quick tip episode. This is the kind of conversation you actually want to sit with because it might shift something for you. And that shift deserves your full attention. So go ahead. I'll be right here. All right, let's get into it, my friend. And I'm going to start with something simple but very important, something that gets glossed over in every Why You Need a Podcast webinar and every Launch Your Show in 30 Days course. Podcasting is slow. It is genuinely, intentionally by design, a slow media. And that's not a flaw. It's the whole point of podcasting. It builds trust at sort of a depth that most other platforms just simply can't reach. But it does so over time and not overnight. It doesn't spike the way a viral reel does on social media. It doesn't generate instant engagement the way most social media does. It compounds slowly and steadily and meaningfully, but only if you're willing to stay in it long enough for the compounding to actually kick in. And that can be a little while. So here's what that means practically. So you will release episodes and they feel like they disappear into the void. You pour your thought and your energy and care into a piece of content, and the response at least the visible, measurable response might be quiet, minimal, sometimes non-existent on the surface. And for a lot of people, that silence is where the doubt creeps in. That's where they start asking, is this even worth it? Is anyone actually listening? Should I just quit? And if you're someone who needs quick traction, immediate feedback, and fast visibility to stay motivated, I'm not saying that that's wrong. That's just honestly not what podcasting gives you generally. And knowing that up front is everything. So here's a question that I don't think people ask themselves nearly enough before they start a podcast. Do you actually enjoy long form content? And if not, do you think it's a good idea? Have you heard that it builds authority? But do you genuinely enjoy sitting with an idea, like turning it over, expanding that idea, going deeper into it than maybe a caption or a story on Instagram? Because that's what podcasting asks of you every single time you sit down to create. You have to be willing to follow a thought down a longer road. And you have to be comfortable with that nuance and complexity, with explaining things in a way that takes more than 30 seconds. And you have to be okay hearing your own voice while you do it, which, by the way, is not as easy as it sounds for a lot of people. Many of us struggle with that at first, but for podcasting to work, you have to be able to move through that discomfort and just keep going. And if you find long form content draining, if you'd rather just write or you thrive in short form, punchy, quick content, that's not something to push through just because someone told you that a podcast would grow your business. There are other ways to build authority, and there are other ways to connect with your audience deeply. One of which might be your newsletter if you have an email list, or maybe you're a blogger or you're on Substack. There are other ways, and some of those might just be a better fit for how your brain actually works and how your energy actually flows. So everything doesn't have to be a podcast, and that's not a failure. It's just clarity. That's why it's important to get clear on how you want to present your content. And if a podcast is not that medium for you, then don't jump in just because it's a trend and everybody's doing it. So the question I want you to sit with is, this is one that cuts through all the noise. You're going to ask yourself, what conversation am I willing to lead for years to come? Not for a season and not for like a launch cycle, but for years. I want you to think in terms of years at this point, because a podcast is not just content. It's a body of work. It's a long form, evolving conversation that deepens over time. And that depth is actually what gives it power. But that power only shows up for the people who are willing to stay, the people who are willing to come back to the mic when it feels like no one's listening, the people who care about the conversation itself and not just the metrics surrounding it. A lot of people came into podcasting asking, what can I talk about this week? And that question, while practical, it reveals a certain relationship with this medium. And the question that sustains a podcast, though, is different, because we want to be asking ourselves, what do I genuinely believe that I haven't been able to stop thinking about or talking about? And who else needs to be in this conversation with me? And that is the heart of a show that will last. So when your podcast is rooted in something that actually matters to you, not just a topic you chose because it seemed strategic, but a conversation you feel genuinely called to lead, that's when it stops feeling like content production and it starts feeling like meaningful work. And that distinction makes all the difference when things get really hard. So I'm going to be really specific now about who I believe this podcasting medium serves beautifully. I think it's built for thought leaders and coaches and consultants, service providers. These are the types of business people that I like to talk to because I know podcasting serves you. And I think you're the kind of people who need trust before a sale can even happen. So if your work requires someone to really understand you, your perspective, your approach, before they ever consider hiring you or buying from you, podcasting is one of the most powerful tools in existence right now, because you're spending 20, 30, 45 minutes a week inside someone's ears on their commute, on their walk, in their kitchen while they're making dinner. That is an intimacy that no ad and no social post and no perfectly curated grid can replicate. The relationship that builds between a listener and a host is unique. It's pretty real. I've had listeners reach out to me after years of following the show who feel like they know me, because in a real sense, they do. They've heard me think through hard things. They've heard me be honest about what I've learned. And I'm pretty vulnerable on my podcasts. So they're going to hear the real deal. And I'm not super curated. Like, I try to just be me, to be myself. And there are a few things that I'm not going to divulge information about with my family and what's going on in my personal life. But for the most part, there are just surface level things that are going to be public content. And I'm okay with people understanding and knowing what's going on in my world. And so I think that is part of my connection and part of the power we have as podcasters to be able to connect personally with our listeners. Listeners to any of my podcasts have heard me in an unedited, unfiltered, real way. Before I learned how to edit properly, they got the raw, real deal. And that kind of relationship converts. It creates clients who already trust you before the sales call, referrals who feel confident recommending you, and community members who show up with real, genuine investment. And this is important, that relationships only build if you show up consistently enough and authentically enough for it to actually form. Which brings me to the part that most people are completely unprepared for. The quiet. The part they don't put on the sales page. It gets quiet. That's what nobody really prepares you for. The episodes that go out and land in absolute silence. No DMs, no comments, no emails, no visible sign that anyone heard it or even cared. And in that silence, your brain starts doing what brains do, right? It starts filling in the blanks with doubt. You start asking yourself questions like, am I really cut out for this? And you start telling yourself, maybe my topic isn't relevant. Maybe my voice isn't interesting. Maybe I should just pivot, or maybe I should just quit. And this is the moment that separates the podcasters who build something real from the ones who quietly fade out. Because what that silence actually requires from you is emotional stamina, the ability to show up and keep showing up, not because the metrics are affirming you, but because you believe in the conversation that you're leading, because you trust that the right people are listening, even when you can't see them, because you understand that slow doesn't mean broken. Podcasting rewards patience in a way that almost no other content medium does. And in a world that has trained all of us to expect immediate feedback, instant likes, real-time engagement, same-day responses, that patience can feel deeply uncomfortable and it can feel like failure. But I just want to encourage you, it's not. It's just the nature of the medium. And knowing that in advance is not discouraging. It's actually one of the most empowering things I can tell you. So we're going to talk about consistency for a moment. And I want to be very specific because I think this word gets distorted in the online space. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean showing up every single week without exception, regardless of what's happening in your life or your business. It means showing up in a rhythm that you can actually sustain. I do talk about this quite a bit on this podcast because I believe in sustainability. I believe in rhythm, and consistency only will work if you understand your own life and you value and respect your lifestyle. So you want to make sure that your consistency is one that you've designed around your real life, not someone else's content calendar. A bi-weekly show that runs for 3 years will always outperform a weekly show that burns out after 4 months. Always. And alongside consistency, you need strategy, not this complicated 47-step content system, but a clear sense of direction. You need to know who you're talking to, what transformation you're taking them through, and how your episodes are building on each other over time. Because you can't just talk into a microphone randomly and expect it to become something meaningful. You have to be leading somewhere. Your listeners need to feel that there's a thread or a direction, a reason to keep following you down the road. And that combination, this sustainability, consistency, and genuine strategic direction is what turns a podcast from a side project into a real business asset. So instead of just asking, should I start a podcast, which honestly might be the least useful version of the question, here's what I want you to actually sit with. Do you want to build authority that compounds over time, even if it means being patient with the process? Are you really willing to grow slowly and to find some type of meaning in that growth rather than just getting frustrated? And can you be consistent even when it feels quiet, when the downloads are modest, when the feedback is sparse, and you're not sure if anyone's paying attention? Do you care enough about this conversation to lead it for years and not just months? And if you answered yes to those questions, not as a performance, but really honestly in your gut, then podcasting might be one of the most powerful investments you make in your business and in your brand. And if you answered no, or even I'm not sure, then that's not a failure. That is wisdom. And there are other ways to show up. Like I said before, there are other mediums that you can build trust with and other strategies to grow your business. So just know which path is actually right for you. And that is the whole point. And if you're listening to this and you're realizing that you want podcasting to be for you, but you're not sure if the show that you've built is actually aligned with your voice and your message and your business goals, that's exactly what my podcast mini audit is designed for. It's a focused, intentional review of your show where I listen with the trained ear and I give you clear, honest, specific feedback. What's working, what's not, what needs to shift, and how to shift it. And you'll walk away with a real roadmap, not a general overview, and not the kind of vague encouragement that leaves you exactly where you started. You can find the link to book your mini audit in the show notes. All right, my friend, I hope this conversation gave you something to actually sit with this week. Not just information to consume, but a real invitation to get honest with yourself about what you want and what you're willing to build. So meet me over at my website, soulpodcasting.com. Check out that mini audit link in the show notes. And until next time, keep podcasting with soul. Happy podcasting.